1. In my earlier post, I explained that I believe something follows me from place to place, because paranormal things happen in every place I have ever lived. I've been talking to my friends about this a lot recently, and one of my friends decided we should try to talk to it to find out why or if something follows me. We use a Ouija board. I know, risky. But my friend is a practicing Wiccan and has used Ouija boards before, and we were taking all necessary precautions and were sure to cleanse the area and close out the board before we ended the session. So the contact we made was strange, and from the sound of it, there was one spirit trying to protect me, and another that was not so good. The energy in the room became extremely negative and intense when the second spirit seemed to take over. So we immediately told the spirit it was not welcome and closed out the board. Since then, little things have been happening, but they've all been explained. Until the other night. So my wife and I were laying on the couch watching TV, and the dog suddenly sits up and looks at the kitchen. My wife looks confused and says, "What just turned on?" I didn't hear anything, so I sat up, and as soon as I did, I hear the sound of a fan and then something click. It was the exact noise the fan on the stove vent fan makes when you turn it on and off. I looked at my wife, both of us kind of freaked out, and then we hear the same noise. I immediately jumped up to see what the hell was going on, and the microwave was on. There was no time on the clock, so I went over, opened the door, and it stopped. I closed it. Nothing happened. But when I turned away, it turned on again. So at this point I thought it was broken, so I unplugged it. All the lights on the display were on, and I assumed it was broken, so I unplugged it and left it unplugged overnight. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it now. This has never been an issue before, and I still don't understand where the clicking noise came from. I know for a fact that the clicking sound we heard was the exact same click the button on the vent hood makes. Still doing daily cleanses in my house, but I am in the mindset that it was only a matter of time before whatever follows me started fucking with me again, and I just gave it a push. Still considering doing another session to get some answers. 2. I had a strange experience around 1995 when I was about 7 years old. My mother was involved in a non-denominational church in Indiana. The church indulged in a wide range of belief systems. They had Native American shamans, crystal and faith healers, psychic mediums, a Mary statue that would supposedly open and close its eyes, and more. As I recall, one of the psychics predicted an extraterrestrial visit on a particular night. Maybe a dozen of us decided to camp out that night, excited to make contact. I believe I fell asleep in our tent, but my mother woke me when someone announced that the aliens had arrived. I don't know how they knew that they'd arrived. I don't remember seeing a spacecraft. We walked down a path into the woods, into the dark, until we saw two figures walking towards us. They were humanoid in shape, but they appeared to be radiating light, so bright that none of their features could be made out. I remember 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head on each of them. But it was like someone had molded light into the shape of a person. The 2 figures walked towards us through the woods and stopped in front of us. Some of the adults tried to communicate with them, but the beings didn't reply. Edit. I have since questioned someone else who was there, and she claims that the beings communicated with her telepathically. The children mostly hid in the back, probably terrified. A man in our group picked up a rock and handed it to one of the beings. The being held it for a moment and gave it back to the man. After failing to communicate with them, someone in our group suggested that we move the children to the front of the group, in the hope that we could interact with the beings. But after a few minutes of stunned silence, the beings simply turned around and walked away. I don't remember anything else from that night, but we returned to our tents and slept until morning. In the morning, I went back to the site in the woods and found strange footprints. If I remember correctly, they had 3 toes. I mostly forgot about the event for years. One day, about 15 years later, it started coming back to me. I asked my mom about it, expecting her to say it was some kind of hoax to entertain the children or something. But no. She said it was absolutely real and that she remembered it the exact same way. Unfortunately, she has passed now, so I can't ask her for more details. But I'm actively looking for other people who were involved in the church at the time, who might be able to corroborate some of those details. I still think it must have been a hoax, but I can't imagine how they could have pulled it off. Has anyone else heard anything like this? 3. I had an interesting experience while camping with my husband a couple of weeks ago. It was a nice drive-in campsite, a corner spot, next to one other campsite and woods on the other 3 sides. We had a nice day hiking, cooked some fajitas and s'mores over the fire, and then we settled into our tent to sleep. Later that night I woke up and heard a weird noise. It sounded kind of like an electric tone. Then I heard what sounded like people talking right outside of the tent. They better get out of that tent. I saw an opossum go in there. Thinking that there must be other campers walking around, I turned over and tried to go back to sleep. A couple minutes later I heard the strange tone noise again, and then what sounded like a cat meowing and walking around the tent. It sounded like my cat when he wants to be let into the house. I'm not about to let strange animals into my tent, so I just lay there and it stopped after about a minute. A couple of minutes later I heard the tone once again. Then I heard a lower, gravelly voice talking outside of the tent. "They better get out of there before I get them." All of this happened over the course of maybe 10 minutes. I didn't react as strongly as I probably should have, but I was tired and thought at first it might be some kind of dream. My husband got up and left the tent to use the bathroom a little while later. He hadn't heard anything, and I didn't hear anything else after that. The next morning, while eating breakfast, I could hear the neighboring campers talking. One of their children, 5 to 7 years old, was upset with his brother because they heard someone telling them to get out of the camper last night, and now his brother was denying that he had heard anything. I'm not sure what exactly happened that night, but it was interesting. 4. One of the slightly less famous haunted places in Colorado is the Third Bridge. A friend of mine, when I was a teenager, introduced me to the place. I was the only one with any kind of clairvoyant abilities, and he wanted at least one clairvoyant person to be with them when they went that night. The place is famous for a Native American massacre, where all of the Native Americans were killed, and a lot of the settlers that were there were killed as well. There was also a car accident that happened there that killed a few teenagers that were driving at high speed and lost control of the car. One of them was paralyzed. Part of what they say you can hear is a girl laughing or screaming on the side of the road due to the accident. In the times I've gone, I've heard the drums beating around me. I've been chased out of the area by an older model car, 60s to 70s era, with a single headlight accompanied on and off by honking from a car, and spotted with random disappearances of a car with no natural explanation. Had my leg forcibly pushed down onto a barbed wire fence which left a puncture wound that left me with a week's worth of light sporadic bleeding and a scar, and felt intense negativity the entire time I was there. One night, during the summer while I was heading there, when the windshield fogged up, and was very hard to unfog even with the defrost on high, despite it still being 80 degrees, that night with no clouds in the sky, I always had to have a drink with me, usually bought from a gas station where I fueled up, so it was still cold and I could fill my tank, since it's an unlit county road. So if I needed to throw up at any point while I was there, I would have something to throw up in. All of the activity seemed to be limited to the road and a circular copse of trees. the negative energy deteriorating once you were back to lit city roads. After these trips, somewhere between 8 and a dozen, I usually had some kind of activity beyond my normal two spirits to follow me home. The first time it was dozens of children and teenage hands pushing onto my back for about an hour, which kept me from sleeping. After a few occasions I would hear loud bangs happening in a room I wasn't in, and when I went to check on what fell, I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary in the room, and there was nothing that had fallen. After one trip, I had been doing laundry. I work nights, so it was normal for me to be doing laundry between 2 and 3 a.m. on a regular basis. I had gone downstairs to make food, then walked back up to my bedroom, which is past the laundry room. When I looked into the laundry room to see the washer had stopped, I'd been downstairs for only 20 minutes, nowhere near long enough to be done, and discovered the lid was open and sitting in a normal upright position, like it was being loaded. I was the only one home at the time, besides 2 dogs, so it shouldn't have been open at all. I would occasionally also hear my name being called, despite being the only person home, besides pets. I've since moved away from Colorado to California, and can no longer visit the 3rd bridge, but last night, something interesting happened. I'd been preparing to go to bed at 3:30 in the morning. After flipping off the lights, I was struggling to find a comfortable position to sleep in, when a female voice whispered my name into my deaf ear. I almost immediately sat up and looked around the room to find it empty. A bright light, like a headlight or one of those super strong police flashlights, swept its way through my room, which caused me to sit up and see if anyone was in the yard, or if I could see one of the neighbors wandering around through their yards with a flashlight. And I couldn't find anything. I ended up grabbing my bear spray next to the bed just to ease myself into sleeping. The place used to call me back at least once a year, sometimes twice, hence all of the visits, and I would usually be okay with not visiting for quite some time. I hoped when I moved out of the state, I wouldn't hear myself being called by anyone other than my normal 2 ghosts, an adult male and a male child. But it's weird I hear a woman. I almost wonder if the place could be calling me back like it always used to, or could it be a new haunting? 5. I feel like sharing my life stories with you, as my fiancé says that my particular situation with the paranormal is above the average. I figured I may as well share with you guys, and maybe some of you can relate, or just get a good few stories. Whatever. The following will be brief encounters over the course of my life, as far back as I can remember. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in my inbox. The first story takes place in my very first home as a child, in a small suburb area of Texas. I do not recall this, but as I'm told by both of my parents, this is in fact truth, and they both recount it exactly the same way. I was about 2 years of age, and at around 3:15 in the morning, my parents are awoken by the slam of the bathroom door. The light turned itself on, the door locked, the toilet flushed, the shower turned on, and the sink began to run at full blast. My father, who was a short, stocky man, jiggled the handle and it wouldn't budge. He eventually resorted into ramming the door off of its hinges, and the bathroom was empty. It could only be locked from the inside. There was a small window above the bathtub. However, it was sealed shut so nobody could open it, and had panels that would have been disturbed otherwise. To this day, that event remains a mystery. The same house years later, I was about age 7. There were always creaks and moans in the house because it was old, but you could always tell the distinct footsteps on the hardwood floors that oftentimes were phantom. I slept with my door open because I was afraid to be alone. One would normally think that it's the irrational fear of a child, but it was much more than that. On this particular night, I was woken up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. They would begin at the end of the hall, stop, turn around and continue to my doorway where again they would stop, turn around and walk the other direction. This happened all night long, and I was in view of the hallway, an empty hallway that was only dimly lit by the nightlight which I kept by my doorway. From that night, and still to this day, I sleep with the door closed. Fast forward 3 years, age 11. I am still in the same house, and my stepfather's own father, my step-grandfather, passed away. We kept his bed in the spare bedroom, the bedroom from the previous story at this point. My mother had finished laundry and was cooking her delicious home-cooked meal of the evening, and asked me to make the bed up in the spare bedroom. I reluctantly did so and wanted to finish it as fast as possible, so that I could log onto the computer and play RuneScape with my friends. Upon fitting the thin red sheet to the mattress, I felt something. More particularly, a hand slapped my bare foot from underneath the bed. I ran so fast I thought my lungs were going to give out, and my heart was going to beat out of my chest. I ran to my mother on the other side of the house and told her what had just happened. Of course, she didn't believe me, but I absolutely refused to finish making the bed, and never stepped foot in that room alone again after that. 3 years after the previous incident, another notable thing happened. I had moved to a rural part of Texas, 15 minutes outside of a town that is so small, I'm surprised it's even on the map. We moved into a house that we built on my stepdad's family-owned land. This is currently where my parents still live, and as of now, I live 45 minutes away in my own apartment. This is all besides the point, but from now on, this is pretty much where all of the following events take place. Age 14, angsty, angry and full of hormones. I found myself isolating myself in my bedroom playing World of Warcraft and listening to that emo music. Like any other kid my age. My parents were out shopping and I was home by myself playing WoW with my door open, awaiting my parents' arrival so that I could help them with the groceries. Something caught my eye in the doorway directly on my left, and I looked directly at the white figure wearing a white robe. I only caught the bottom half, legs and feet walking away from my doorway. But I looked directly at it, and I know exactly what I saw. I called my parents, panicked, to see if they were home, and my mother told me that they were still about 10 minutes away. I locked myself in a room and had never been so terrified in my life. My parents got home with the groceries and checked around the house. There was nobody else there. I feel like this was the realization that whatever was with us in the old house had in fact followed us. Nothing but more paranormal stories to follow over the years. On many occasions I found myself home alone, as my stepfather is a sheriff, and he works almost an hour out of town, and my mother at the time worked at a hospital, and was always gone. I have a history of very poor health. That's a whole different story in itself, but I was always home early from school per doctor's orders, and spent the majority of the time alone in the house. On several different occasions I have armed myself, and walked around the house looking for intruders because I would hear footsteps, doors opened and close, and voices while I was home alone. To no avail, of course. Vacant, nothing but silence followed me in the dark corners of the house. This instance takes place just before summer break. I woke up one weekend and decided that I smelled of teenage odor and needed a shower. I collected my clothes from the closet and began walking to the door. I remembered that I had left the closet light on, so I turned around and began walking back to turn it off, when I saw the light turn off by itself, and I heard the switch fall into the off mode. I checked it, and sure enough, it had just turned off by itself. I brushed it off as just another strange event, and made my way to the shower. I sat my clothes down on the bench and proceeded to walk over to the toilet to relieve myself for the morning, when I heard my grandfather's voice, my step-grandfather, mentioned in the previous stories, who has long been passed since this time, say, "Good morning, Jeff." I was not frightened, but a little caught off guard. I finished up my business and walked out, deciding that I could just go one more extra day smelling like a teenage wreck. This next story takes place at the age of 16. My best friend had just started dating my sister. I know, right? Ew. They were outside looking at the stars and chatting, and my parents had been asleep for upwards of 3 hours at this point. I was in the living room watching Ghost Adventures, because we all want to see Zack flex every time he sees what he thinks is a ghost, and laugh about it. The kitchen is attached to the living room directly, only separated by a bar. All at once the cabinet doors and drawers opened and slammed. I freaked out and ran out to my sister and best friend, and told them what had just happened, and ironically enough, they were listening to the weirdest screeching sound coming from all over the property, just seconds after the other. Way too frequent for any living creature to move that fast, to the opposite side of the property. I now too bore witness to this. We all slept in the living room that night, and listened to the sound of our own bathroom door opening and closing on its own. The next morning, me and my sister told my parents what happened, and they denied it and tried to find logical reasons for it. I lost my temper and stormed off and locked myself in my room. My mother knocked on my door. My mother eventually got me to let her in, where she sat down and talked to me. She told me that she believed me, and shared some of her own experiences in the house. This was the first and last time she ever admitted to there being paranormal activity in that house, despite other occasions where it was just me and her in the house, and she would make me investigate unexplained sounds. Later that year, I was showering and preparing for family to show up. The glass door on the shower has a design that you can see through, and I had just got done rinsing my luscious locks. Not really, I was balding at this point, when I looked up through the glass door and clearly saw somebody walk past the shower. I turned the shower off, got out, looked around and said, "Hello?" Like I actually wanted somebody to answer, when in reality, I would have evacuated my bowels on the floor had I have heard an answer. Luckily for me, nobody answered. There was nobody in the bathroom with me. I never heard the door open and never heard footsteps, but I know what I saw. I ran out, towel falling off, into the living room, where I met my mom and told her what had happened. She laughed it off as usual, but she understood that I was quite serious. Just another one of those things, I guess. My sister at this point lived in a travel trailer out back behind the house, due to poor financial choices and being unable to afford her apartment. I was in the kitchen, got a big glass of my mother's bomb sweet tea, and listening to music when I heard the loudest scream coming from the woods behind my sister's trailer. My sister immediately ran out of her trailer and into the house, where she stayed for the night. We asked my parents if they heard it, and they said no. They were asleep at the time, and my mother leaves a fan on. We had a spare bedroom where me and my friend got a little too audacious and decided to hold an EVP session. We caught voices and even left the house entirely to get food, and heard shuffling and voices on the cell phone recorded when we got back. I know, bad idea, we acknowledged it. We kept a landline in that room, and had one of those old cord phones set on the nightstand. We would have to check it every other day when there were no phone calls coming through, because it had a tendency to lift itself off the hook and lay sideways so nobody could call through. Age 18, I was visiting my biological father after our newly rekindled relationship. He was convinced that I had Lyme disease, which has been the cause to all my health problems prior, and he was taking me to see a doctor out of state the next morning. This is the same town that I grew up in, where the other stories took place, just a different house. I was laying in bed. I heard my dad get up and shuffle around. I looked over, not fully conscious yet, and saw a woman with long black hair laying in the bed next to me. It wasn't threatening, but more comforting than anything. I thought it was my ex-girlfriend, being that I had just woken up. Clearly I wasn't fully awake, but I was conscious enough to know that my father was about to open the door and turn the light on. When he opened the door and motioned to turn the light on, The figure rolled out of the bed and disappeared. At this point, I'm about to explode with confusion because I realized what had just happened. I crawled to the edge of the bed and looked around and saw nothing. My grandfather, who is a believable source, who actually lived in the house behind that one, rode with us on the trip. My dad brought up what I saw to him, along with other things that have happened in the house. My grandpa described a woman that used to live there that hung herself. He described the woman that I saw in the bed down to the teeth. I was shocked, but I didn't feel threatened. I later moved in with them for a short time and had a few experiences here and there, but nothing notable. The next story happened about 5 years ago, back to the house in the woods with my mother and stepfather. I was 20, and I had just gotten home from my ex-girlfriend's house. It was a long commute from Houston. I was hungry and tired, so I was making myself a sandwich. My parents had gone to bed 10 minutes earlier, and I was standing at the counter putting together the most delicious concoctions you've ever had between your buns. I heard and felt somebody run up behind me really fast from the living room and stop directly behind me. I thought it was my mom, and I laughed and said, "Hey, what's up?" I turned around expecting my mom to be standing there, and was all by myself. I finished making my sandwich and put everything up before proceeding to my parents' bedroom, and asked if any of them had come out. Not like it would have been possible anyways, and neither of them had been out of bed since they had laid down for the night. The more recent ones this year have happened after moving to where I currently stay with my fiancé. We do our laundry at my parents' house, and it never fails. Something always happens. First visit. My sister's baby monitor was getting static pulses while we were all sitting at the table talking. We heard a very deep voice come over the monitor, and then my niece started crying. My sister checked the room, but nobody was there. Second thing that happened to us is our landline being disconnected for years at this point. For whatever reason, the phone in the bathroom would sometimes go off. I went to the bathroom, and sure enough, it did. I disconnected the line while I was sitting there doing my business. I saw a shadow pass in front of the door. After I finished up, I came out and asked my fiancé and my mother if they had been in the room, and neither of them have. This is when my mom decided to blurt out to my fiancé that I see ghosts, despite me not being ready to tell her about that yet. Next on the list was the night that we stayed over doing clothes. It was late, and we were both too tired to make the drive back home. My fiancé goes into our spare bedroom, my old bedroom, and the door attempts to shut behind her. I slept like a rock that night, but my fiancé told me that she felt somebody watching her all night and didn't sleep. Another occasion was when we were leaving after visiting family and friends, and it was really late. We were going to our car, which began to lock on its own. She thought she accidentally hit the button, so she open-handed the keys and it locked again. We were puzzled at this point, but the door continued to lock until we were both in the car and ready to leave. It had never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. Our most recent event was about a month ago. We were leaving and we both heard a female scream coming from the front of the property. We booked it out of there, and we haven't had anything happen to us since. Knock on wood. These are just a few of the things from my past. There are lots more stories that I can't even begin to recount, but I am glad to share what I can with you guys. If you have any questions or just want to chat about it, you can inbox me or comment below. Have a spooky night, everybody. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 57. Big thanks to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Where are we now? Friday? Yeah, Friday, good. Well, heading into the weekend. Hope you guys all have a very nice, pleasant weekend. Hope you have very sunny weather for it too, because I'm hoping to have the same myself. The other day I had to work, I had to sit down and make videos, and it was a gorgeous day, it really was. And it broke my heart that I had to actually work, but these things have to be done. And when The next day, when I was free, of course it was dull as could be. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.